Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. This is Alexis Brooks with Quest, and welcome to JDE Week. Today's session is a testing time for orchestrations, presented by Pat Neary, Dave Harrison, and Graham Downs with DWS. Just a few housekeeping tips to go over before we get started. All attendee lines are in mute and will stay mute throughout the session. If you have any questions, please put them in the question drop-down box located on your GoToWebinar panel, and we'll answer them at the end of this session. At this time, I'm going to pass things over to Pat to kick things off.
Thank you very much, Alexis, and thank you everyone who's on the call attending, and for those of you who aren't attending and listening this as a recording, thanks for registering and finding time in your busy schedules to listen to what we've got to say about Orchestrator and testing using the Orchestrator. I'm joined today by Dave Harrison and Graham Downs. I'm doing the sort of hosting and introduction. And Dave, if you can roll forward, we've got a very, very simple agenda. I'm going to make sure everybody knows who we are, DWS, and I'll do that in just a few minutes and won't overplay that. We'll move on to Dave, who's going to talk about the Orchestrator and specifically about the assertion framework and our experience, doing orchestrations and trying to use and make assertions work. We'll look at that from a couple of different perspectives, from a testing orchestrations perspective, as well as testing processes that include orchestrations. After Dave's done his bit, I'm going to Dave will hand over to Graham, who's going to talk about specifically about our solution for test automation, a product called Swift Test. But you can think of this generically. If you're faced with a choice, right? How do you best use Orchestrator, to meet your requirements? If you're thinking or are contemplating using Orchestrator as a vehicle for testing, that's fine. You'll learn a bit about what that means from Dave. But we wanted to give you guys an opportunity to see what a product that's been written specifically for functional regression testing looks like, and how our product, Swift Test, has been enhanced and extended to work with orchestrations. So, Graham's got some really neat stuff to show you there, and we'll highlight some of the benefits that you get from a specialist test application like Swift Test, working with Orchestrator. And then we'll wrap up. I'll come back on with a finishing slide, and then we'll go into the question and answer stuff. So that's the plan, and that's where we're going to go over the course of the next 45 minutes, to an hour. If we finish a bit early, great. We're pretty sure that we won't run on too long. So hopefully you'll enjoy the time that you've set aside to go through this with us. So we roll forward, Dave. As a company, DWS has been around since 1998. So, that is more than 20 years. I guess we're coming up to 24, 25 years, something like that. We've been in the Oracle community from the very beginning. We're a gold partner. We started out as a systems integrator, providing development and technical services within the JD Edwards Enterprise One space. The work we were doing within Enterprise One around development and upgrade, retrofitting, and more recently code currency, sort of led us to develop some testing products. So we have a suite of testing products, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And we're 40 some odd people dotted around the globe, in 10 different companies, and we've got customers big and small all over the place. So that's a little bit about us, in broad terms. Dave, one more. We work with companies, from conception through to, where they are today. What you get with DWS, the gray line that runs through this picture is, sort of a pedigree and an excellence in and around and understanding, JD Edwards and the JD Edwards code base. Those products and services we have can help at any phase, wherever you are, and we'll welcome an opportunity to talk to anybody who's interested in how we might be able to help them. One more, Dave. We have a range of solutions, testing products. The one product that you're going to see today is called Dimension Swift Test. It's the second one on the left-hand side there. And it's all about scripting and automating, your functional and regression testing. But we do have other products that we've written specifically for JD Edwards Enterprise One. The first one there on that list is Dimension Focus. It's an analytic tool which helps you understand the business impact of incoming change. And it helps you understand the implications of, bringing ESUs in or an update or a release or whatever we want to call it nowadays. And it helps you better plan and manage your projects and resources and plan your testing as well. And as a complement to Swift Test, we have a load test application as well that works for JD Edwards. For anybody who's looking beyond JD Edwards, obviously this is a JD Edwards week, and we're talking about Orchestrator specifically. A lot of the JD Edwards community, are looking at edge applications and considering, Oracle Cloud applications, the Fusion Cloud applications. For particular requirements. Our Swift Test product actually works with the Oracle Fusion Cloud applications just as well as it does with the JD Edwards applications. And you'll get to see a little bit of Swift Test later, and hopefully you'll appreciate that and enjoy that. From a services side, as I said, we're all about development and technical services. We've got a number of branded services. They're all related to helping people do the retrofitting, during an upgrade or a code current change event. We have analyze services, professional retrofit project services, and code current services. So that's that, and we'll go one more. And you'll be happy to know that I have nothing more to say other than that the guys will be talking about DWS products and software solutions, and we've got the obligatory safe harbor statement here because some of what we're talking about is a work in progress, and some of what you see might be a little bit different as and when it comes to market as finished product. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Dave Harrison, who's going to pick up and take you through the next section, that we have on the agenda. Thank you very much, and go for it, Dave.
Okay, thank you very much, Pat. Yes, welcome everyone. Thank you from me as well for joining us today. So as Pat said, I'm Dave Harrison. I'm a senior developer, project manager, and technical solutions architect at DWS. So I'm going to be talking to you about Assertion framework and how you can use it to test your JDE applications. We're big fans of Orchestrator at DWS, and we think Oracle has done a fabulous job with this tool. In fact, we've always been big fans of everything that Oracle has done it for JDE. Including going back to business services many years ago. The AIS server, mobile apps, all those UX and extensibility changes, all the way through to Orchestrator and everything in between. So they've done a fabulous job. So I'm assuming that you'll have some basic understanding of Orchestrator, and that you know how to create form requests and orchestrations. So I won't be explaining everything that you'll be seeing. Let's start looking at talking about Assertion framework. So Oracle released this in tools 9.2.5, and that was a little over a year ago now, and it allows us to validate the data returned from any step in the orchestration. So you can use it, for example, to verify that a JDE Edwards application has produced the results that you expected, you know, and that it ran without any errors. And we do this by defining the rules or assertions, as they're called. And these rules allow us to compare the values returned by the orchestration with some expected values. And we can define multiple assertions, and if all of them pass, then those assertions have been met and the test has been successful. We'll see a little bit of what that means a little later. I'm going to do a quick demo for you. But we can use them for not just for testing the applications, but also for testing any orchestration data. So if you've got an orchestration which is calling an external system, then these assertions can be used for validating the data that's returned by that system as well. So why test? It's a fairly basic question, really, but it's one that's easy to answer. As we can see some of these examples here, but it's not always easy to do. Testing is important, particularly for those companies where the quality of their services or the quality of their products is paramount. It takes time to do it properly, and it's not the most exciting job in the world. So, and it's prone to human error if you do it manually. So that's why companies look at automating this process. Using tools such as Orchestrator, as well as like purpose-built test automation tools. So how do we define these assertion rules then? So there's some new options that Oracle's provided, and I'm just giving you a bit of a preview here. We'll actually see it in the demo a bit later, but one of the ways is to capture the assertions when you're recording a process using the process recorder, in order to create a form service request. So there's a new option here on the where you define the return values, and that opens up some extra fields to allow you to define these assertion rules. We also have a new tab on the output section of the orchestration. So the example down here where we've defined some assertions, and these are the rules that will be applied to this orchestration. And as well as the normal sort of comparison operators, you also have the ability to compare against a range of values or a list of values as well. It's important to note that this is the only place where the actual rules are evaluated. So even if you've defined some rules in the form request, such as when we're using the process recorder, as we saw in that previous slide, then you'll still need to copy them to the orchestration. And Oracle has provided this little add button here to allow us to do that. Okay, so it's demo time. And this is where I'm probably going to lose my internet connection. That's all going to go wrong, but we'll see how we go. Right, so I'm going to start off. So this is already logged into JDE, and we're going to start the process recorder. So I'm guessing a lot of you have seen this already, this type of thing. So we'll start a recorder. We're going to record the adding of an accounts receivable invoice. So we'll start with the customer ledger inquiry. It was running quickly earlier. Oh, live demos, don't you love them? Okay. Let me stop that. Let me log out and log back in again.
I'm feeling your pain, Dave. It'll be all right.
Okay. Do a refresh. All right, close the window. If all else fails. Okay, I've lost my favorites part. Bear with me a second, people. Okay.
Good stuff, Dave.
Let's try again. Let's try again.
Fingers crossed.
Apologies for that. Right, record a process, and we'll press start. And customer leisure query. Isn't that fantastic? Right. Let's press the add button to add a new invoice. And customers 3006, company 70. Enter today's date, and we're going to do this quickly. Enter an amount and a remark. Okay, let's press the OK button, and this will take us to the GL distribution. We'll enter 720. Okay, now at this point, we want to capture one of these assertions. So this is the option I mentioned earlier, where we can define these assertion rules. So I'm going to capture the amount to distribute. So this is on this invoice, the tax has been deducted from the gross amount, and it's calculated the net amount, which is here we see the amount to distribute. So part of our test that we're creating is to validate that tax is being calculated correctly. So I press resume now, carry on, press the OK button. And I'm going to add one more assertion as well, and I'm going to return the previous document number. This time, I don't want to just compare it with that document number is going to change each time. So here, I should just want to make sure that it's returned like an invoice number. So I just want to say whether it's going to be greater than 0. Okay, resume again, and now we just press cancel and cancel again. And we can save our form request. I'm just going to call it request demo. There we go. And press save. Okay, now let's go over to our Orchestrator Studio. If I go to form requests, type in demo, there we go. That's the form request we just created. And with the various forms, I guess you're familiar with this. If I go to the GL distribution form, if you remember, that's where we define that first assertion. If I click on the return form data, I can see where that rule has been defined. I actually know that this particular form request, we need to make a few little changes. One is to change this grid form, the grid variable, because we already have a grid data 1 that's returned from the invoice entry. So we change this one here. And the other thing I'm going to do is add this operation here to select the row number to update, because move it up there. If we don't put that in, then it doesn't actually. I just happen to know from experience that it doesn't work. There we go. Let's save this. So we're running this under tools 925.2, I think it is. So later versions of Orchestrator, you can actually create the orchestration directly from here. But for now, what I'm going to do is go back to our orchestrations and click New and create our orchestration. It's going to call that form request. There we go. So I will now define the inputs, which I'm going to do by adding the inputs for the form request to the orchestration. Before I map them, I'm just going to go into the inputs and just take out the version, because we want to we don't want to use that as an input. And I'm going to add another input here as well, just call it net amount. So what we're doing here is we are defining as an input what we want to use for validation purposes as the net amount. And we'll see that a little bit when we're in a minute when we're defining the assertions. So if I now go back to my transformations, I can do an auto map, and I can enter the version there as the default value. Now, if we go to the output section, we mentioned we have this this new tab. Before we do that, I'm just going to select the amount to distribute and the previous doc as return outputs, and I'm going to define the assertions. So if you remember when we were looking at the slides earlier, there was this add button. So this is where those assertions that we mapped earlier through the process recorder can now be copied to the orchestration. So if you don't do this, then those assertions aren't going to, in the fact they're defined in the form, they're not going to happen. So we need to click on that, and that copies them in here. Now I'm just going to make a change here. As you remember, we had added that input variable. I'm going to select that as the amount to compare against the amount to distribute. There we go. Right, and then if we save this, okay, we can now run this. Okay, I've got a request which I've already pre-built, so I'm going to use that here as the raw input. It's actually adding 2 invoice lines, and yeah, and it's so let's try running this and see what happens first. There we go. We get results back. That's all good. Now we have a new option here on the run orchestrations window here, where we can evaluate these assertions. So I click on that. We get a new option here. If I run it again, I could see that the assertions have failed. So I've specified that I wanted, or expecting the net amount to be 91.22, and it's actually calculated as 91.21. So that assertion's failed. If I change that and run it again, all good. The assertions are passed. So we're now we need to think now. You know, we've shown how we can create an orchestration with assertions, you know, and validate them. But yeah, this isn't automated testing, because we need someone who's going to be able to run this orchestration and check the results. So let me go back to the slides. You know, wouldn't it be better to automate automate it by calling the orchestration from somewhere else and then checking the results of the assertion that way. You know, we could probably create another orchestration which calls the one we just created, and then if any of those assertions fail, then we could perhaps send out a notification. You know, but we still haven't got an auditable record of the tests that were done. And that could be important, you know, particularly if you're in like a regulated industry, for example, and you know, you need a more sophisticated solution. And if you're using orchestrations, you know, for your day-to-day operations, then it's also important to recognize that you still need to test these just as much as you need to test your applications, you know. So, you know, our view is, you know, assertions certainly have their place. You know, if you want to do simple testing, you know, they provide a solution to that problem of how to test. You know, they're a fabulous addition to Orchestrator and can add value, you know, but, you know, orchestrations can be tricky to create at times, you know, as we saw there earlier. And then, you know, it certainly isn't something you're going to want to be, you know, to have your users doing. So, you know, you might be better off using something which has been designed for testing and, you know, is designed to test orchestrations. So therefore, you know, we'd like to show you how we handle this at DWS. And with that, I'll pass you over to Graham, who's going to show you how to call these orchestrations from Swift test.
Yes,
so Graham,
thanks, Dave.
I'm going to make you presenter then, Graham.
Thanks, Dave. Yes, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. Just a quick introduction. I'm Graham Downs, as Dave said. I'm a senior software developer on the solutions team at DWS Dimension. And we're responsible for developing the all the applications on the solutions side of that slide that I showed you earlier. And the one I'm going to show you today is DWS Dimension Swift Test, which is a purpose-built application for testing JDE Enterprise 1. And as Pat mentioned, we could also do Oracle Fusion Cloud Apps. Quick crash course. Don't have very much time. So Swift Test is organized into what we call projects and catalogs. A catalog, and you can see them here on the left-hand side, is basically a testing environment, points to an environment of E1. So, for example, you could have a development environment, a staging environment, and a production environment as 3 different projects or catalogs. Or they could just be used as categorizations, higher-level categorizations. So I've got one here called Graham's Public Project. Underneath catalogs, we have what we call scenarios. You can see them here on the right. Scenarios are just extra levels of categorizing to group similar tests together. I've created a scenario for today's session. And underneath scenarios, we have individual tests, which are scripts that we build out by adding actions that are going to test E1. And you know, there's a wide variety of things we can test on E1, including running of orchestrations. So I've started building out this test beforehand. I'm loading some JSON data into memory, into what we call a runtime data store, which is a bit beyond the scope of the session, I suppose. But you could think of it like in-memory variables if you want to. So I'm going to add an action. Now, these are all the things that we can do in Swift Test. We can log into E1, we can click buttons, we can enter values. The one I'm going to show you right now is run orchestration, specifically the run orchestration JSON action, because we're going to be calling now an orchestration very similar to the one that Dave just set up for you, with pretty complex input. Here's a list of all the orchestrations we have on our server. To pick Quest JDE week. It wants to know where, once we've run the orchestration, it's going to return JSON output. So where do we want to store that? This is also a reference to those runtime data store items I told you about. This is going to create one. So let's call it quest JDE output. And then it wants the input. Or we can hard code JSON in here, or what I'm going to do is we're going to pick dynamic value, and we're going to pick an item from our data store. This is the one that I created earlier that I loaded the input into. And just to give you a little bit of context, if you are familiar with JSON, here is the input that I'm going to be passing. This is the input just in a notepad window in human readable format, so you can kind of see what's happening. We're passing in an invoice and then some lines in one JSON statement. Important thing is this JDE assertions true. This is what Dave was showing you earlier. With this line in the JSON input, we're telling the orchestrator server to evaluate assertions, which will become important later. So now I'm going to click execute to execute this action. And it fires up a browser because the way SwiftTest works is it opens up an internet browser session in order to connect to E1. So that's now done. Now, what you will see if you expand this data store panel, you'll see what wasn't there earlier. You'll see quest JDE output. This is the output that was returned from that orchestration, all in programmatic minified format, so no line breaks. Again, I have prepared it in Notepad so that you can see it in the human readable format. This is what that orchestration would have returned. Specifically, we're interested in this JDE assertions block. These are the two assertions that have been set up in the orchestration, and they're both passed. And right at the end of the JSON, we can see assertions evaluated 2, assertions failed 0, assertions passed 2. So now what SwiftTest allows us to do, I'm just going to copy that, is we can now use this data that's come back from the orchestration in a variety of ways. For our purposes, for example, in this test, all we want to do is we want to confirm that none of the assertions failed. So the first thing that I'm going to do, we now got that JSON output in a runtime data store item. So if I scroll down and find the action called extract from JSON, this is one of our actions. It allows you to take a JSON string, any JSON string of any level of complexity, and then given a URL style path, retrieve a value of a field. So what we're going to do is we're going to say use quest JDE output, that JSON string that was returned from the orchestration, path to extract. All I want to do is extract the value of the assertions failed element, and result 2. Similarly, it needs to know what is the name of the data store item I want to create. So let's go assertions assert failed. If I now execute, you will see another item pop up in the data store list. There's my new data store item, assert failed. Its value is 0, which is correct. That's what we saw in the JSON string. Assertions failed was 0. And now, again, we can go on and do various things with this value depending on what we would like to test. As a very simple example, all we want to do in this case is we would like to compare that value, that assertions failed value, is 0. So we use this compare values action we have in SwiftTest, which basically is building up a Boolean or a true-false expression. And what this is going to do is it's going to cause the test to fail if this expression we're going to build is not true. So I want to say, I want to compare that dynamic value, the data store item, request assert failed. I need to compare that it is equal to the specific value, 0. And now, if I click back, you can see that this test has been built. 6 steps: loading the row into the data store, run the orchestration, extract the assertion's failed value, and compare that their value is equal to 0. So that's all well and good, but what Swiftest also allows you to do is, when we execute this test, it keeps a record of all the executions and what each of the steps did and whether they passed or failed. We've also got a web-based portal, which I'm not going to show you in this demo, but which your users can use to log into and pull reports on these executions of the various tests and export them as PDF or Excel or Word. So if I execute this test now in its entirety, it's going to just load up the list of everything in the data store for us to compare, because these things might mean different things depending on our test. We might want to, on the fly, change things like the environment or the password, even the URL that we connect them to. But for the moment, we're happy with all of that. So I'm just going to execute. And you'll see in a moment, there are all the actions. They're about to be executed. It's firing up a browser to execute them all, and they're done. And in this particular case, all of them passed. If this comparison, you'll see it's resolved it at runtime. Compare 0 is equal to 0. The value of that variable when we ran it was 0. If this had been 1, this action would have failed and the test would have failed. Now that we've executed the test, I can click on the little expand, and here are all the history, all the times that I've run this test before. It's worth noting that we can also run these tests on a schedule, so it's not just manual. You'll build the test manually, and then you can schedule it to run on a daily basis or once a week. So here's the history of the test I've just run. There are the actions as they were run. I can click on any one of them, and I can see the details, all the parameters have passed in, out, the result. So that is calling a relatively complex orchestration, passing in JSON data, getting JSON out. This is as complex as it gets when calling orchestrations. If you understand how JSON works, there's a lot you can do with the input and the output. What we also have available is the ability to call really basic orchestrations. These are orchestrations where if you've got something that accepts 1 or 2 inputs and only one level of input and only returns a single record. For example, in this example, we had an orchestration that was getting an alpha name. So we pass in an address number, return the alpha name. You don't even have to touch JSON. If your orchestration is that simple, you can just add a simple orchestration action, punch in or use the data store to specify an address number and retrieve the result and store it in another data store item. So that you could also do. And then it's also worth mentioning that Swiftest is capable of testing E1 in a variety of ways, not necessarily relying on orchestrations. So I've created this test earlier. The orchestration that we called, and the one that Dave showed you, is an orchestration that's designed to enter an accounts receivable invoice. So what Swiftest can also do is Swiftest can simulate the exact steps a user would take testing the UI. So physically logging in to E1, opening this application, clicking add on the menu, entering this, clicking OK, all the way out to closing down. So it's worth mentioning that we can do the same thing as that particular orchestration was doing without using orchestrations. I could potentially execute this test. I'm not sure, Pat, how are we doing for time?
I think it'd be a shame not to show it running, Graham. I think you gotta press execute.
No problem. Let's click the button. So similar to previous action, click execute. It's going to load the list of data store values. If I needed to, I could change them on the fly. I don't, so I'm just going to execute. And similarly, there are all the actions it's about to execute, and in a moment, it will fire up a browser window. And my hands are off the mouse and the keyboard. By the way, this is fully automated. And you can see it's doing exactly what a user would do. This is going to run for about 2 minutes, probably. And then I'll show you the history of this test, and I'll show you that we can get screenshots every step of the way, which would also be available in that web-based portal that I told you about earlier. So if a user were to log into that portal and pull a PDF report of this execution, all the screenshots would be there, all the timestamps would be there. I can show you that in a moment, but as you can see, this is simulating exactly what a user would do, and it will do this every single time you execute this test. And the test is done. You can see that all the actions passed. And if I click OK, and once again I expand and I click on the history, this is the execution I've just run. There are all the actions. As you can see, we even store, where applicable, as you're going in, we store the application, the form, and the version that we were logged into, entering values in a customer field. On the right-hand side, similar to the orchestration, here's all the technical info about the action, all the steps that we took, all the exact values that were passed, the date and timestamps, and I'll click on screenshot. That's the screenshot that we took at the time. Because Swiftest itself is a tool for building and executing tests, not a reporting tool, we can't expand or enlarge the screenshot from this application. We can save it to our hard drives, but if you were logged into the reporting portal, the screenshot would be a much higher resolution for you. And that's it. I hope that you found that insightful and useful.
Yeah, that's good. That's good, Graham. Thanks for doing that. It's a really good, good quick run through what, how Swift Test can help you take advantage and make better use of Orchestrator and the assertion framework, in our opinion. And it goes without saying, there are other scripting and automation tools, but Swift Test from DWS has been written specifically for Enterprise One. And, as you saw just very briefly with Graham, we've got actions within the Swift Test client that mirror and understand, JD Edwards as an application. So that's really, really important. So we're back with the slides, and we're back with Dave. So Dave, can you roll forward? So here we are. I promised that we'd close. I would do a bit of a close, and that we'd have some time for questions and answer, and we will. I think we've made it pretty clear that we're huge fans of JD Edwards. We're very happy to be part of the community, an active member of the community, helping people succeed within the community. And we think the orchestrator and the assertion framework is brilliant. And the next point is that, testing orchestrations and processes that include orchestrations can become pretty difficult pretty quickly. I think we saw that with Dave and what Dave was doing. It's not impossible, but I think you want to really think about what it is you're trying to achieve and what are the best tools, to achieve to do the job. And arguably, if you want to do functional regression type testing, you should really look at and think about a functional regression type testing type tool like Swift Test that's very business analyst sort of super user friendly and has a lot of a lot of power and capability. With Swift Test, you get that audit trail, you get the documentation. And, as you saw, Swift Test now, interacts with and understands orchestrations. And we've not only developed actions, that allow us to work, to work with orchestrations. We've added an API. I think that's the right word, Dave. Is that the right word? We call it. We've added some interoperability features and capabilities that allow Swift Test to sit in quite sophisticated CI/CD pipelines. We have customers that will do package builds and installs and whatnot, on every couple of weeks. And as part of that whole process, they include Swift Test executions, as part of that. And some of those executions are quite simple functional type tests, like Graham showed you at the very, very end, that are just Swift Test. Others are more sophisticated and, see Swift Test calling and running orchestrations and doing those sorts of things. So one more, Dave. And we go to a final slide in terms of the close. When I talk about, to the community and JD Edwards customers, I'm always encouraging, people to think about testing smarter. And I talk about the community, I'm talking about systems integrators as well as end customers. We're happy to work as DWS with systems integrators, just as happy to work with systems integrators as we are to work with end customers. And as you guys all know, Oracle for quite some time now has been encouraging everybody to get current and stay current. And we're big fans of get current, stay current. Obviously, our testing products help people do that. And our development and technical services, Analyze, Professional, and Tempo, are all about maintaining your code base and keeping your code base current so that you can continuously adopt and innovate. And when you look at what we're encouraging and what we do, I think what we do as a company is help companies like yourself, people like yourself, run smaller, faster, and smarter projects. And that's what we're about. And hopefully what you've seen today is, piqued your interest, and will lead you to, want to understand what we do a bit more and maybe even look at Swift Test a little bit more closely. You roll forward one more time, Dave. If you can get in touch with me, my email address is patrick.neary@dws-global.com, or you can just go straight through to that sales@dws-global.com email address at the top. You can find our, those are all the other bits and pieces, that you might want to go and look at, our website, our Twitter, Twitter profile, YouTube channel, and LinkedIn profiles. And we encourage you and welcome you to get in touch. We do have the ability to let people trial Swift Test. It's not the full. We won't help you and give you access to absolutely everything. But you can at least get your hands on it and you can kind of get a feel for what it's like. We have some apply to try options, and you can fill in a form and we can help you get set up and use the software for a couple of weeks and try and understand whether it's going to work for you. And we'd love to be able to do that with you. One more, Dave. We're at that point in the conversation where we'll be happy to answer any questions that people have. I said to the guys that we shouldn't remain faceless, so I'm going to turn my camera on. I think that's going to work. Yeah, and you can see me sitting in our office with at my desk. You can see Dave and Graham as well. We're not a bunch of faceless individuals.
With my messy background. Yeah, I couldn't blur out.
Dave's got his toys in the background, and Graham's in his gaming chair working away. But yeah, let's see what we've got for questions, and we'll we'll go from there. I've sort of moderate these. Can we upload values through spreadsheets, Graham? I think that's more for you with SwiftTest.
We can indeed. We've got a functionality in SwiftTest called the repository. The repository is for storing persistent data that can be used by tests and written to by tests, and you can import into those repositories via spreadsheets, yes.
Okay. And we got another question, which is concerns debugging an orchestration or a form request, and I guess that's a Dave question.
Yes, that's right. If you saw when we did the run orchestration, there is an option there to debug the orchestration, so you can step through the orchestration and look at the values that are returned from each step. So that is certainly there. That's more about just generic orchestration stuff rather than assertion framework in particular. But yes, that's certainly possible.
All right, good stuff. We always get some commercial type questions, and we've got one or two here. Somebody's asked, whether SwiftTest is licensable or whether it's free. If it were free, I wouldn't make a living. So it's not free. It is a licensable product. It's available as a service, so it's a software as a service product where customers pay us annually in advance for a user. So a test user is somebody who is creating projects, scenarios, scripts, and running tests. As a test user, you can assume lots of different persona and do lots of different things. So even in really, really big companies, the population of people that need a license for SwiftTest might only be, 10 or 20, maybe 30 or 40 in some of our biggest customers. And everybody always wants to know the price. You just, in very, very simple terms, we charge our starting price, if you will, is $5,000 per user per annum. And I'm quite happy telling you that because we don't think it's very expensive for what it does. And we'd love to see lots of people getting familiar and using it and trying it. And as I say, it is possible now to go through a little process with us. We call it apply to try because it's not just as simple as giving you the keys to the car and letting you go and try the software. The architecture is such that we need to do a bit of work in order to help people actually try to use the software, but we are able to allow people to apply and try the software for a couple of weeks. So don't hesitate to give us a call to do that. Yeah, I think I've answered sort of the licensing question there. There's another question concerning our APIs. So can we call external APIs using SwiftTest? We have outbound API, Graham or Dave?
We do. It's based on the calling of the orchestration that you've seen. That is, it is pretty much the foundation of calling out outbound APIs. Other types of APIs, not orchestrations, it's in the pipeline. It's coming. Okay.
Yeah. SwiftTest's constantly evolving, improving. And I see a couple of people on the attendees list that, have used SwiftTest or are current users of SwiftTest. We're excited to see it continue to improve. The move from JD Edwards to make SwiftTest work with Oracle Cloud Applications was quite exciting for us, and it means that we're serving not just the Oracle JD Edwards community today, but we're getting to know and establishing ourselves within the the Oracle Fusion Cloud Applications community as well. Okay, it's 18:24, so we finished in good time. Right, 18:24 where I am. We're sort of dotted all over the place. I think, Graham, you're in South Africa, aren't you? So it's even later still.
Yep.
Dave's on the south coast in the UK, as opposed to me, where I'm just outside of London. But let's wrap it up, guys. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your participation and attendance. Really, really appreciate it, and hope that you can give us some feedback, and that you get on the website, and get in touch and ask us for demos, or apply to do trials or what have you. We'd love to tell you more about our products and our services. And we think what we've done with integrating or having Swift-Test interact with Orchestrator is super cool, and takes advantage of all the good work that Oracle's done. So hopefully you guys see it that way too. All right, thanks everyone. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thanks for
Good
coming.
night.
Bye, everyone.